Hey, storytellers, this is your favorite storytellers coach. I want to start with this is your permission to begin. I'm going to be coming out here every Wednesday for Just Right Wednesdays to give you some tidbits on why this is your time to write the story that's been in your heart, in your soul, in your spirit. 5 years ago, I decided that I wanted to step out of my comfort zone and really do something that I had been saying I wanted to do probably since I was in high school, and that was to write a book. But I had no clue what the content of that book would be. At one point, I thought I would write more of an inspirational type of book. Or, when I was in school, I was like, oh, I could write a leadership book, all of those things. And year over year over year, I buried, honestly, that dream because I was a mom, I was a wife, I was working, I was a leader at work, had a global role, all of those things. And my desires and my dreams really got put on the back burner. But it wasn't really until 2019 when some things start happening in my life that really brought upon a high level of anxiety, a high level of grief due to the loss of some family members, and just due to a shift and transformation that was happening within me. And then the pandemic hit. So, in addition to grief and depression and just uncertainty about the next steps in my career, in my life, we have this pandemic that totally changed the way that we lived. So, I was stuck in my house with my husband and my kids, and was like, I'm going crazy and I need an outlet. I need something to do differently than get up in the morning, log onto my computer for work, make sure my son was logging onto his computer for school. Everyone's yelling about the internet connection, all of those things. Couldn't really, we could go outside, but couldn't do the things that we would normally want to do. And it became chaos. And I felt the chaos. The chaos started to surface again in that anxiety and depression just in the moment. And I decided to start reading again, which is something I hadn't done in a really long time. When I was in graduate school, of course, I was reading all the graduate school textbooks and really said, I don't want to read another word. But then I was introduced to romance through just being on Facebook, kind of following different people, seeing what they were doing to honestly pass the time during the pandemic. And I came across an author that I started to read her books. It was a romance author. I started to read her books and I was like, oh, I'm going to start with one book. And then there were two books, and then there were three, and then 10, and then 15. And it just became almost an obsession. But then that obsession turned into me taking my journal and starting writing down story ideas that I would have in my head. And it really kind of triggered some memories, positively triggered some memories of when I was in high school and I would write poems and write stories, or I would read a book and say, I don't know that I would have had it go in that direction. Or I would look at a movie and I would have the same thought of, I would have actually ended it this way, or that character would have been, set up in that way. And it made me start thinking about that previous desire and dream that I had to write a book. And in 2019, going into 2020, I saw a challenge from this particular romance author who said, hey, who wants to write a book? And I raised my hand. I said, me, along with a few other women who were aspiring to be authors. And in December of 2020, I published this little book. Look how tiny it is. I published this little book. It's about 71 pages. Actually 64 pages. I was giving myself more credit. It's about 64 pages, and it's a holiday short story called French Kiss Christmas. When I look at this book, I actually kind of laugh because I had no clue what I was doing when I wrote this book. I just wrote it. I wrote the story that was in my head about a guy named Garrett and a girl named Nia, who met and fell in love pretty quickly, but there was some drama and some trauma in this little book. But I laugh because I'm like, the cover, like, it's not even centered correctly on the cover. The words are off center on the back. You can't see my logo, any of those things that I kind of threw together, quite honestly, to write this book. But I share this because if you are still waiting for the perfect moment to start writing, it's never going to come. Um, it wasn't the perfect moment for me to write this little book, but I did it anyway. And I did it scared and I did it afraid. I was still a wife, I was still a mom. I was still working full time, honestly, probably working more hours than when I was going into an office. But I still wrote this little book because it was a dream that I had honestly deferred for far too long. And while it's not perfect, when I read back through Nia and Garrett's story, some of it I'm like, what was I saying? What was I even thinking? But I did it anyway. So if you are waiting for that perfect moment to start writing, it is never going to come. You don't need to have it fully mapped out. I didn't have a strategy when I wrote French Kiss Christmas. I didn't have a story plan or an outline or my characters even fully developed. I just did it. And you don't need, maybe once I get time, once work slows down and I have some interrupted hours, I wrote this thing during lunch, doing coffee breaks. I wrote it helping my son with his homework. I wrote it talking in my phone when we would take walks because we didn't have anything else to do during the pandemic. I wrote it late at night, early in the morning. So you don't necessarily need these blocks of time that you've planned beautifully. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to have the perfect conditions. I didn't have a writing room at that time. I had a couch and a computer. I had a backyard and a chair. That's it, right? And a computer. But what I did have is the willingness to begin. What you need from yourself, from no one else. You don't need a publisher. You don't need to be the best grammatical writer or sentence structure writer or the best speller. What you need is permission to begin. And that permission can only come from you. You need permission to be messy. I can point to at least 5 to 6 errors in this published work. So you need permission to be messy, permission to write without knowing what's going to happen next, without knowing where the story is going to go. And it makes me laugh when folks tell me, oh my God, Robbie Renee, I know you because of French Kiss Christmas. And I'm like, whoa, don't tell anybody, right? I used to say that, but now I realize this was my beginning and I'm proud of it. I am proud of these 65 little pages that I wrote, not knowing what the heck I was doing, not knowing how the story was going to end, and honestly, not knowing where this person I created on a whim called Robbie Renee was going to take me. But this little book, this was the catalyst to this big book. This was the catalyst to French Kiss Christmas was the catalyst to my my publishing deal that became this book called Somebody's Husband that is now in bookstores, right? Look at the comparison. I'm showing you this because I like to think about how far I've come, and so should you. I gave myself permission to begin, and then I gave myself permission to keep going. So I really challenge you that every story begins somewhere. Every story begins with a person on Facebook who I didn't even know who said, "Oh, I can make you a book cover." I was like, "Okay." I think I paid her $20 to make this book cover. So thank you, Danny L, who made this book cover for like $20 because I wasn't in a place where I wanted to pay hundreds of dollars for a book cover, but I wanted to get it done. I had the determination to get it done. So every story begins somewhere. So start where you are. If it's a collection of notes on post-its, if it's a collection of thoughts and stories in your journal, start where you are and just write it. Write it in those moments when the inspiration hits you, whether it's early in the morning. Record it in those moments where inspirations hit you if you're on the treadmill or the spin bike. And I'm saying this because this is what I did. You are a writer the moment you start writing. You are a writer the moment you start writing. So it doesn't have to be beautiful. It doesn't have to be when a publisher says, "Oh, we'll give you a contract." It doesn't have to be when you find the perfect editor. It doesn't have to be when you have an amazing book cover designer. It has to be when you have pushed imposter syndrome out the way, pushed the doubt out of the way, both the self-doubt and potentially doubt from others out of the way, and you give yourself permission to just begin. 5 years ago, I had no dream of where this alter ego called Robbie Renee could take me, but it has taken me from one book to 15 books and counting. It has taken me to Amazon #1 bestsellers list twice. It has taken me to win awards for my writing in the independent space, and I'm so proud of that. It has taken me to a book in Barnes and Noble, not just on their website, but on their shelves. Books in Target on their shelves. Books in Books A Million on their shelves. Book in the MLK Library in Washington, D.C. on their shelves, right? So you have to give yourself the permission to begin. And I challenge you, let today be that day you start. Even if it's 100 words, write that 100 words with conviction, write it with confidence, and write it knowing that you are going to keep going. So let this be the day that you move from just thinking about being a writer and you step into the actual space of doing it. Drop me a note in the comment and tell me who's going to start writing this week. Who's going to start writing this week, whether it's 100 words or 1,000 words? Who's going to start writing and who's ready to give themselves permission to begin? I'll see you next time.